Chapter 5, Auril Abode, is one of the more difficult chapters to run in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. It has potentially huge implications for the campaign. It can be a mess to pace and also make entertaining for the characters, and it has a lot of moving parts that you may need to control. So in this video I'll be going over all of these things, trying to give you the tools you need to make running Chapter 5 also both fun for the players and easy for you as the DM. Alright, so my name is J.A. Valeur with Eventyr Games, and this is the 21st video on running Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I've also created a DM's guide with the DM's resources, including maps, advice, and so on, which you can find on the DM's Guild. So in this video I'll be going over Chapter 5, Auril's Abode, which in my opinion is one of the more difficult chapters in the book. So yeah, without much further ado, let's take a look at Chapter 5, Auril's Abode. In the build-up to Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden's release, we got some interviews with some of the creators of the book, many of whom sort of pointed at the fact that you could actually defeat the main villain of the adventure early when you're going to her island, which is what we're talking about today. They seem to put this forward as a feature of the book, while I sort of think it is more of a bug. I don't think you're meant to kill Auril in the middle of the adventure, and while it's always fun to sort of subvert expectations and give the characters an opportunity to do something crazy and out of the picture, the issue with killing Auril on her island in Chapter 5 is that it sort of removes the whole point of going to Icewind, which of course is what Chapter 6 and 7 is about. Of course, there's also the possibility that the characters do not kill Auril. That's maybe even more realistic possibility considering their level when they're going to the island and her challenge rating. But that would just mean her potentially killing them, which of course isn't much better for the campaign actually going smooth. So how can we sort of fit Auril in, or fit something in Chapter 5 while still ensuring that the whole adventure isn't derailed completely? Well, I think there's a few ways to go about it. I think you can sort of avoid Auril. That would be informing the characters that Auril is away each night. That could be an NPC letting them know that. Velin, Professor Skant, Nass Lantomir, etc. There's a lot of people who could sort of inform them of that and maybe make it clear to them that facing Auril isn't a very good idea. They should probably just wait till she's away and then go into the fortress of Grimskalle to get what they're after and so on. Another way we can do it is also to put some thought into how we manage a fight with Auril. One way you can do this is to have Auril be very arrogant and sort of let the characters know that she's way more powerful than them if she's getting the upper hand, of course, and that she could easily kill them, but she's letting them go because she doesn't even want to waste the time on them. She has to fly off to cast her spell and so on. Giving the characters tips that they are outmatched and they should probably flee or count themselves lucky that they even survived is a good way to ensure that the adventure isn't derailed because of the characters dying, of course, but you still get this sense of this is a god, we're not strong enough to face her yet. Another way you can do it is of course also to have Auril flee or try to flee if the characters are getting the better of her, which I think is unlikely at this level, but you never know. So if the characters are getting lucky, make sure that Auril quickly manages to escape on the back of a rock perhaps, or using one of her many legendary features and so on. It should be quite possible for her to make an escape instead of trying to fight it out to the bitter end. If the characters do manage to kill Auril, that doesn't even have to derail the storyline, because if you're making a simple change, which I actually discussed way back in one of the first videos, and have Auril's everlasting rime be actually everlasting, which means that it has to be dispelled. The spell that Auril is casting every night is just to enhance the effect and make it colder and darker and so on. So even killing her won't stop this, it will only delay her as she comes back in the next winter solstice, and the characters will still have to go to Icewind to dispel the magical effect that has already been created. Finally, you can also replace Auril. In this case, I've written up a sample agent in our DM's resources for the chapter, who's Princess Gelluvigen, daughter of the queen that once inhabited Grimskalle Fortress, and she's dedicated to the Frostmaiden, of course. It's also her who flies on the back of the rock each night to cast the spell and enhance Auril's everlasting rime. So when the characters have a showdown with someone at the island, you can just replace Auril with this Princess Gelluvigen, who is gonna be a tough combatant, a very tough combatant, but something it is more likely for the characters to actually defeat, and someone you can actually use as a catalyst to introduce Auril. There's a whole scenario written up for this in the DM's resources, but the main gist of it twist that if the characters defeat her or they manage to escape, she sacrifices her life to bring Auril to the material plane. So she's actually the one who summons Auril or calls her to the material plane, and the characters can get this sense of, okay, we messed up. Now this deity is actually hunting for us because we stole something of hers. It's also something that I've described on our blog at eventyrgames.com. So if you follow the link also somewhere in the description below, you can get a write-up of this sort of encounter, at least the main details of it. Alright, so one of the things that I think is more difficult with Chapter 5 is actually the pacing. Chapter 5 is a more contained scenario. Everything happens on an island and you have a lot of encounters and possible challenges, but it's not entirely sure how many of them the characters are going to face and so on. When I say pacing, I basically mean how we can ensure that the characters are facing enough challenges in an adventuring day to challenge them and make it exciting, but not so many that they're suddenly going into an encounter with Auril already completely depleted. The simplest way to handle the pacing of the chapter at this point is to give them a deadline for this day. If the characters arrive by ship or anchorage or the griffins, you can have these methods of transportation inform the characters that they can only wait here for 24 hours before they have to go back to wherever they came from. Giving the characters 24 hours like this ensures that they have at maximum 2 long rests, which ensures that they can't just spam long rest while they take their time running through the encounters on the island. Of course, limiting the stay to 24 hours means we have to do some tweaking to the tests, some of which can be quite long, but I'll get into that in just a minute. The second way we can pace the chapter is to also put some restrictions on how and when the characters can long rest. The book already has a rule of this that sort of punishes short rest, and I think this is the wrong way to do it because you actually want the characters to take short rests, giving them back a bit of hit points, some class features and so on, but maybe wait or be more hesitant to use their long rest because these give them back everything and sort of resets the tension of the chapter. So what you can do instead is say that long rests aren't possible as long as Auril or Princess Gellerwing is on the island. It simply gets too cold, so if you don't have cold resistance or immunity, you can't get the benefits of a long rest. This way, the characters will have to wait until nightfall when the Auril or Princess Gellerwing leaves the island on the back of the rock before they can take this long rest. So they'll use the day exploring the island, perhaps finding some of the stuff they need, maybe encountering some things, and then at nightfall they'll have the opportunity to either take a long rest, at that point going into Grimscale Fortress maybe shortly before Auril or Princess Gellerwing is coming back, or they can simply go in directly and have a lot of time to explore the fortress. Either way, this sort of gives them a choice about when and how to rest, and also ensures that they are not just, again, spamming long rest and making the tension of the chapter feel really bad. When I say pacing, it's also, of course, not just about rest, but also the order of the challenges. In my preferred scenario for this chapter, the characters get to the island maybe in the middle of the day. They spend the day exploring the island, going down to some of the ships, there's fighting the trolls, the yeti, and so on. And at nightfall, when the rock leaves, the characters then have the decision to make: are we going in directly, or are we resting first? But eventually they will be going into Grimscale Fortress, where they can explore, undergo the test, and get their hands on the Codicil of White. If we're using Auril at the island, it's probably fine for the characters to just get their hands on the Codicil of White and then escape, maybe just as she comes back or before she comes back. But if we're using Princess Gellerwing in place of Auril, this is also a good time for them to have an encounter with her, especially if they're reasonably well rested. So yeah, that's my preferred pacing, and I think that putting this deadline and these restrictions on the chapter ensures or makes it more likely that we're getting this sort of pacing. In our DM's resources for Chapter 5 also Abode, we go over a lot of the different locations on the island and sort of troubleshoot them and give some advice on how to run them or how to maybe change or even improve them. Here I'll just go over some of the more important points, some of the stuff that I'd maybe put a little thought into before running the chapter. First off, there's of course Nass Lantomir, who by the book is just lying around somewhere in the isle, clutching Professor Skant, which Villain is of course looking for. It sort of seems a bit random that she's just lying around somewhere with the exact plot device that the characters need. That's something that I've discussed previously. I think it probably makes a lot of sense to put her on the Dark Duchess somewhere during Chapter 2 instead and have the characters go there to find the orb. But if you haven't done that, it's a bit late for that, or you just don't want to do it, you can of course still have Nass Lantomir just lying around on the island. If you're doing so, I think it would probably be good to let the characters know that she's there. You can have Sapo, this mephit that they're meeting when they arrive on the island, simply tell them as much. And I haven't had any visitors since that ship wrecked here, and the woman who's lying over there, and so on. Give the characters some clues to actually finding Nass Lantomir and getting the orb, because otherwise how likely is it that they're just gonna wander around the isle and stumble upon her dead body. When the characters do stumble upon Nass Lantomir's dead body and speak with her ghost, there's sort of this scenario written out in the book that I think can also be improved a bit. The best way to do it, in my opinion, is to keep it sort of hidden away from the rest of the characters if you're able to, and this could be by having Nass Lantomir immediately try to possess a character as they approach the body. Of course, you can roll a charisma saving throw for the character in question secretly, and then maybe slip them a piece of paper or send them a text message letting them know what has happened. I've included a handout which you can use. It's part of the DM's resources that sort of has the details of Nass Lantomir and a bit about her personality and how to roleplay and how this scenario unfolds. If this impromptu possession fails on Nass Lantomir's part, you can instead have her try to convince the characters to let her possess Velin if she's with the party, so she can show them to the Codicil of White. And that's an honest enough offer. She wants to sort of control her rival's body. That's a good punishment for her, something that Nass Lantomir would enjoy, and she of course is as interested in fighting the Codicil of White as is everyone else in the party. That's a sort of cute little scenario you could have play out, where you force the characters to either destroy the ghost and go on without her help, or maybe make a sort of bad friend out of Velin instead of having her just be a loyal part of the party. So yeah, there's some few ways you can make the encounter with Nass Lantomir perhaps a more fun experience for the players. Another way you can do it is also to decide that the orb, Professor Skant, isn't with Nass Lantomir's body. This of course forces the characters to go down into the shipwrecks lying around the island, which can create some fun encounters and something you can fill out a session with. You can then have the orb be in the possession of the 3 hag sisters, who are also described in the chapter, and perhaps the hags need an ice troll heart in exchange for the orb, which means that the characters can either just of course try to destroy the hags underneath the water, or they can head up onto the isle, find the ice troll and bring the heart to the hags. In any event, this is sort of the stuff that can make the characters explore the island a little more before heading into Fortress Grimskalle. A hugely important part of the chapter is of course these 4 tests of Auril, which the characters will have to undergo to get their hands on the Codicil of White. I think the idea of the 4 tests is pretty good, but I think that some of them sort of misses the mark, or at least makes it very unlikely that the characters will succeed, in which case the book has some druid randomly show up to open the door, which I think is a weak ending to what is probably a pretty fun part of the book. From the get-go, you can decide that the characters do not actually have to pass the test, they only have to go through the test. So all characters who are walking through the door must participate in the test, but they do not have to have completed them. You can then add some consequences of not completing one or more of the tests by having these frescoes or murals of ice giants that are just inside the entrance to the vault containing the Codicil of White, maybe blow a blast of ice on the characters that deals more damage if they didn't complete enough tests, and so on. So going through the individual tests, the first test is this test of cruelty, which basically means that the characters have to go to a camp where they are gonna eat some elderly, and they can either help kill the elderly or at the very least abandon them to their fate. Now the issue with this test is of course that that's grossly evil, and the characters may not even know that they're supposed to do that. So one way you can make it more likely that they actually do complete this test is that you can have Velin offer guidance, say we probably need to kill these or at least leave them alone, and if the characters are squeamish about it, you can have her say, well, I'll do it, it's no issue, I can kill them, making it her decision and leaving it up to her instead of the perhaps goodly aligned characters. If the characters are strongly opposed to this, you can also have the chieftain try to fight the characters, and when they inevitably defeat him, he's dropping down to his knees, begging for his life, and at that point you can have the tribe shaman intervene, tell the characters that they must kill him even though he's begging for his life and pleading for mercy. That is the Frostmaiden's will, and that's how they pass her test, stuff like that. So they're not gonna kill defenseless elderly to be eaten, but killing an evil chieftain who's now begging for his life. That pill may be a bit easier to swallow for some characters at least. Next up, there's the test of endurance, which basically has the characters running for 14 hours or more alongside some barbarians. I think this test is not very interesting, and it's also a bit long, especially if you have sort of a time limit on how long the characters can be on the island and you want to preserve the pacing. It can also be a bit punishing because the characters can actually rack up a lot of levels of exhaustion. So what I think you can do instead is you can reduce the time frame to 3 hours, have it be a sprint instead, increase the DC hour by hours, but a maximum of 3 levels of exhaustion can be incurred. Then there's the test of isolation, which I think is sort of weird. You can get some madness that doesn't really impact the game at all. There's no real consequences. The way you can rewrite this is, of course, again, make it shorter, make the madness more impactful. Perhaps it can even cause characters to attack each other. Again, I'll have the rules show up on the screen somewhere here, and you can also find them in our DM's resources. The test of preservation is one test that I wouldn't change. I think it works fine as is. It's pretty easy to understand what you're supposed to do, and the challenges within are suitable, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time to complete. Another thing, minor thing that I'll probably change is the Hall of the Four Winds, which is where the characters can get some clues on Auril's tenets and so on. A bit weird to me that this is placed in a place where the characters can't see it before undergoing the test, because simply knowing these tenets would be a lot of help in completing the test and knowing what they're supposed to do. So what you can do is you can just switch the 2 rooms around so that the Hall of the Four Winds is before the door that the characters can't open, making it more likely that they see these sort of small tips and understand better what they are supposed to do as they're undergoing Auril's tests. Lastly, then, of course, there's this issue of running an encounter with either Auril or Princess Gellervigen, which I think that is not a requirement of the chapter. It's something you can do without, but if you are gonna run it, I think the most interesting way to do it is to do it as the characters are leaving the island. Having it in the middle before the tests again sort of defeats the purpose. They're not even after the Codicil of White anymore if they defeated Auril. By putting the encounter at the end, you make sure that the chapter finishes on a strong note, and you also give the characters an opportunity of escape, or at least make it more likely that they escape, or they try to escape, because they already have what they're after, the Codicil of White. So now they just need to get away with their lives and the Codicil. The way you do this is by having Auril or Princess Gellervigen confront the characters as they're leaving Fortress Grimskalle, or just the room with the tests, or where they got the Codicil of White. I think the encounter runs pretty well underneath Grimskalle if you're running it with Princess Gellervigen, who is more likely to be a fair combatant to the characters, or a fair enemy that they can actually defeat. If you're running it with Auril, I think it works better to have Auril sort of chase after the characters as they're leaving. This could be her arriving back just as the characters are coming out of the fortress, seeing them, and they have to make a mad dash for whatever means of transportation they had, where they can then fly away on the griffin back, or they can sail away on the ship, maybe being aided by ballistas that are shooting at Auril and her rock, or they can go onto Angerjuk, who can of course dive underneath the waves, evading the princesses or Auril's wrath. Having an encounter at the end there where the characters are trying to escape is a way to really make it tense at the end and exciting, and end the chapter on a high note, in my opinion. If you are using Princess Gellervigen, this is also a good point to make her manifest and summon Auril to the material plane by having her standing on the edge of the island, shouting after the characters and cursing them before raising her arms and telling the Frostmaiden to accept her mortal vessel and come to the material plane, and so on. But yeah, all in all, that's my advice for running Chapter 5 Auril's Abode in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. There'll be more videos coming out, of course, on Chapter 6, Caves of Hunger, also on Ithrin, maybe more videos on that chapter. And I'm also still considering doing some videos on Chapter 2, some of the locations there that we haven't covered yet. I put out a poll about this before I had my little hiatus and vacation here in July on our Patreon at patreon.com/Eventyr, where the patrons can get to vote on what videos we are going to do and so on. And I'll be putting up some new polls for the content going forward, both for Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, but of course also for the upcoming adventure, which is taking place in the Feywild, and is something that I'm also pretty excited about. So yeah, if you want more Frosty content, Feywild content, a say on which videos we do, or just want to enjoy a good time and join the discussion in our Discord, head over to patreon.com/Eventyr and sign up. We'd love to have you. The support means everything. So yeah, beyond that, I'm just happy to be back. It took a while. There were some troubles that I won't go into, and I had a long vacation, which I am very happy to go into but which I think would be quite boring. In any event, it's awesome to be back, and I can't wait to put out more videos, and I thank you so much for subscribing and following along. It's very exciting what we've built in such a short time, and all the encouragement that I've been getting is really, really heartwarming. So yeah, thank you, and until next time, have a good one.